The U.S. Supreme Court has handed down those two decisions that will have both immediate and long-lasting impacts on Oklahoma college students. Affirmative action has been eliminated in the admission process, and President Biden's student debt forgiveness program has been ruled unconstitutional. With more on the local reaction to those decisions, we're joined by education reporter Taylor Jackson. Taylor?
Rich, those holding student loans will have to pay them off under the Supreme Court's ruling, while some in Oklahoma believe that the colleges and universities here will continue to bring in a diverse student body despite the apparent end to affirmative action on campus.
I believe the court's decision to strike down my student debt relief program was a mistake.
It's back to the drawing board for President Biden's attempt to provide financial relief to Americans with student loan debt.
I mean, it was appreciated towards me because I didn't want to pay that stuff back.
Missouri Western State University graduate and Oklahoma native Calvin Balque says he was relieved during the COVID pandemic when President Biden announced his plan to forgive student loans. But he was disappointed to hear that the Supreme Court struck down the plan.
I think it's completely unfair, honestly. Unless you're still going to school or still pursuing school. But if you're done with school, I think it's completely unfair.
It doesn't mean there won't be a plan B for loan forgiveness.
There's different programs that the president could use to grant the same type of relief. He could expand current programs that forgive student loans to include more types of professions.
First, I'm announcing today a new path consistent with today's ruling to provide student debt relief to as many borrowers as possible, as quickly as possible. We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan, the so-called Higher Education Act.
President Biden says that pathway to loan forgiveness will take longer, but it's the best pathway forward in the wake of the Supreme Court's ruling in Biden versus Nebraska. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion, saying in part, where the Secretary of Education claims the authority on his own to release 43 million borrowers from their obligation to repay $430 billion in student loans, the Secretary has never previously claimed powers of his magnitude under the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act of 2003 allowed the Secretary of Education to grant debt relief for student loan borrowers in the wake of 9/11.
Those were wartime and military service conditions, but there's also a broad condition that allows a waiver or modification of student loan debt for national emergency.
OCHA says the legal challenge might not be finished yet.
See other lawsuits come up that try to assert that the president and the executive branch didn't have the authority to go through some of the COVID-19 programs that were allotted. It would be a different question of law because the loan, specifically that issue, was tied to the 2003 HEROES Act. And so it'd be a different basis that somebody would have to attack. But most definitely, it's possible for somebody to raise that issue.
The other major decision by the Supreme Court last week, which impacts college students, stems from two lawsuits combined into one. Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard College. It involved both Harvard and the University of North Carolina using a racial standard for college admission. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the court's opinion on that case as well. It is far from evident, though, how assigning students to these racial categories and making admission decisions based on them furthers the educational benefits that the universities claim to pursue. ACLU Oklahoma Executive Director Tamaya Cox-Torre disagrees with the court's ruling.
I'm a proud recipient and benefit of affirmative action, and those that have benefited from programs of equal opportunity should be proud of that. But what we know is that there continues to be systemic racism that hurts brown and black folks in our state. And any opportunity that we can have to help those problems, we should be taking.
The decision was celebrated by State Superintendent of Public Instruction Ryan Walters, who is a member of the OETA board by virtue of his position. After the decision, Walters released a statement saying, Oklahoma has led to get education focused on academic merits. This Supreme Court ruling resets education away from issues like DEI and allows kids the best outcomes as they enter into college. The impact on Oklahoma's colleges and universities may not be as profound, thanks to voters approving State Question 759 in 2012. It prohibited the use of affirmative action in the admission process, and Oklahoma wasn't the only state to do that.
In states that have already banned affirmative action, and California being the first state and has one of the longest records of banning, is that it does have an impact on universities. We saw that in Oklahoma as well, that even if that impact is minor, that it still impacts just the well-being and the comprehensive education that students should have.
Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education says as of this spring, 9 of Oklahoma's public colleges and universities had a majority of non-white student body. They expect undergraduate enrollment to continue to move in that direction despite the Supreme Court's decision. Cox Torres says she has faith that Oklahoma's institutions of higher learning will continue to be diverse.
So while we are extremely disappointed with the Supreme Court's decision to end affirmative action in colleges and universities, what we know is that colleges and universities still have a commitment, and hopefully will have a commitment, to ensure diversity is a part of their schools on campus.
The data research group Words Rated says more than 400,000 Oklahomans are carrying $15.4 billion in student loan debt. While that sounds like a rather large number, Oklahoma only has the 30th largest student debt burden in the U.S.